Approaching the end of another decade in 2019, Universal Orlando Resort will yet again host their premier Halloween event, Halloween Horror Nights, for its 29th time. This year's event would continue to bring all new horror to endure, as another collection of IP adaptations and original concepts would come to terrifying reality. Ready to play the deadly game of Halloween Horror Nights 29? Because fear has gone to the max. This is SP History. In preparation of the 29th Halloween Horror Nights event, Creative will continue with last year's marketing strategy by incorporating many new and returning horror IPs to headline the Haunted House lineup, all while having an overarching aesthetic to the entire festivities. The aesthetic would once again be of the 1980s, though most of the offerings held wouldn't connect to that decade as much as the previous year. But like mentioned, the event would again incorporate many popular horror intellectual properties within many of the event's offerings. For instance, Universal would again team up with online streaming service Netflix to create another haunted house based off the popular series Stranger Things, continuing off the massive popularity of last year's iteration. Other IPs to be featured would be films like Jordan Peele's Us and Ghostbusters. With that said, Halloween Horror Nights 29 would run for 42 nights from between September to November, 6 more nights than previous, featuring another round of 10 haunted houses, 5 scare zones, and 2 shows, as guests enter a sinister Universal Studios Florida where your worst fears live inside. Beginning with the haunted houses at Halloween Horror Nights 29, it would be the usual assemblage of IP-based houses and brand new nightmares. The first house would be located in Soundstage 22 and be based off the 1984 classic horror comedy film Ghostbusters, as it shared the same title. Within, guests would encounter events from the first film as they follow the paranormal fighting group, equipped with their proton packs as they fight off many ghoulish spirits, such as Slimer and Gozer the Gozerian. Though the house is based off the first entry in the franchise, some ghosts from other films would feature inside, being more of an encapsulation of all the films made. The next house would be placed within Soundstage 24 and be an original concept featuring demented Yetis, as it would be called Yeti Terror of the Yukon. Inside, guests enter a remote camp set in the cold Yukon, where a legion of brutal Yetis call home and are hell-bent on spreading terror throughout as they attack any intruders in their territory. The third house of the event would be held in Soundstage 24 and be based off the 2019 Jordan Peele horror film Us, as it shared the same name. Inside here, guests would step right into the film as they witness the Wilson family coming face to face with the Tethered, evil clone version of themselves who will kill anyone who stands living. Jordan Peele collaborated heavily with Creative in developing this house, making sure every set was identical to what was presented in the film. The following house would be within Soundstage 25 and be the second house to be based off the popular Netflix series Stranger Things, maintaining the same title. In this year's house, guests would be able to witness events from the second and third season of the show as they once again follow the cast of characters as they endure many evils of the Upside Down, including Demodogs and the Mind Flayer. The fifth house would be located inside the MIB tent and be based off the 2003 Rob Zombie horror film House of a Thousand Corpses, as it shared the same title. Within here, Guests would get the full experience of the film as they enter Captain Spaulding's Museum of Monsters and Madmen, home of the Firefly family, where many demented maniacs await their next victims as they look to add to the collection of blood and gore. House of a Thousand Corpses would win House of the Year for 2019. The next house would be placed inside Sprung Tent 2 and be an original concept set in an underwater facility, as it would be called Depths of Fear. Inside, guests would enter an underwater mining facility where a race of parasitic creatures named mouth brooders have infested throughout, infecting miners with their acidic fluids, causing total chaos, and guests must escape this hellhole before it self-destructs. In the storyline of the house, guests would not survive at the end as the facility would implode, a unique story choice never utilized within any haunted house created. The following house would be inside Sprung Tent 1 and be a prequel to the 2011 original concept Nightingale's Blood Prey, as this iteration would be titled Nightingale's Blood Pit. Within, guests find themselves in ancient Rome, where they enter beneath the depths of the gladiatorial arena where the ferocious nightingales hunt throughout, looking to feast on defeated warriors and any other fresh blood. The nightingales would have a new design to them, as with the house being set in an earlier time period than the original, this race would be a less evolved version of the creatures. The 8th house would be located within the second Parade Warehouse building, and see another house featuring the Universal Classic Monsters, as this version would be simply titled Universal Monsters. Taken from the popular concept used at the 2018 Hollywood event, guests would once again come face to face with Universal's most classic film monsters, more terrifying than ever as they look to wreak havoc all about and create the ultimate house of horrors. The 9th house of the event would be within the original Parade Warehouse building and be an original concept featuring vengeful ghouls, as it would be titled Graveyard Games. Inside here, guests enter the Ascension Parish Cemetery, where teens Sid and Nancy have maliciously vandalized, awakening all the spirits who call home, and they seek revenge for their actions, looking to create the evilest hell to ever be known, as guests try to venture through alive. Just like Depths of Fear, guests would not survive their journey in the end of the story, instead becoming one of the new spirits in the cemetery. The final house would be inside the Shrek Theater and be another IP scare zone turned house, as being based off the 1988 cult horror comedy film Killer Clowns from Outer Space, sharing the same title. Taking the same concept as last year's Trick or Treat house, guests will experience in a more expanded version of this IP adaptation as they experience key scenes from the film, as the extraterrestrial clowns bring their demented circus to Earth, looking to harvest new victims into cotton candy cocoons. Also similar to Trick or Treat, the house incorporated many props from the previous scare zone. This was the entire lineup of houses at this year's annual event, bringing all new horror intellectual properties to life and creating new terrifying original horrors. For the 5 scare zones featured this year, it would continue with the popular trend of IP-based zones and new realms of evil. The first scare zone would be placed in Plaza of the Stars in Production Central and be set in a retro arcade, as it would be titled An Arcade. Here, guests enter a sinister 80s arcade where a gang of neon slashers have taken over, looking out for new blood, ensuring that no one wins the game of life or death. The second zone would be within the New York area of the park and be based off the horror comedy film franchise Zombieland, as the zone would be called Zombieland Double Tap. Featuring elements from the first film and the at the time upcoming sequel, Guests find themselves in the United States of Zombieland, where hordes of flesh eaters roam about, and characters from the films teach guests the ultimate rules of survival. The next scare zone will be held in the San Francisco area and feature the music of iconic rock star Rob Zombie, as it would be called Rob Zombie Hellbilly Deluxe. Here, many of Zombie's disturbed beings from his music videos have found themselves onto the streets, spreading madness throughout as the artist's music is blasted throughout. The fourth zone would be placed in Central Park and feature reanimated Vikings, as it would be called Vikings Undead. Within, zombie Vikings have taken over Central Park, looking to perform gruesome rituals on passing bystanders, creating an endless onslaught of gore and rage. The final scare zone will be held in the Hollywood area of the park and featured botched beauties, as it would be called Vanity Ball. Here, guests find themselves in the ball of the grotesque, as many maniacal models and surgeons roam about looking to garner new flesh to turn into their most ideal beauty aesthetic. But in tradition, some areas of the park would hold unofficial zones hosting the Chainsaw Drill Team, and this year only had one located in Springfield, featuring skelly saws, masked troopers armed with their razor-sharp weapons, spreading terror throughout. But moving on to the entertainment offerings at the event, 2 shows will be held nightly, supplying exciting energy to the entire festivities. The first show will be held in the Studio Lagoon and be an all-new offering featuring this year's IP offerings, as it will be called Halloween Marathon of Mayhem. Using elements from the newly debuted Universal Cinematic Celebration Night Show, guests will get involved into a mixtape of mayhem, highlighting all the popular intellectual properties featured at this year's event, including neon lasers, projections, and fountains, creating a spectacle of terror. The second and final show will be held in the Fear Factor live stage and be the 4th offering to feature the popular dance troupe Academy of Villains, as this year's performance would be titled Academy of Villains Altered States. This iteration of the show finds the dance group in a bigger and better show, where it's an epic experiment of mind and body as they involve guests into a killer mix of exhilarating dancing and extraordinary theatrics. This was the complete set of offerings that occurred at the 29th Halloween Horror Nights event, featuring highly elaborate street scares and entertainment to die for. In its entirety, Halloween Horror Nights 29 would be another excellent addition to the history of the event, creating the most immersive sets to ever be seen and bringing all new horror intellectual properties to life. Throughout the years, Halloween Horror Nights has been a staple of the fall season at Universal Orlando Resort, allowing guests to enter worlds of the most popular horror films and television, and create characters who become the ultimate culprits of nightmares. And as the world's premier Halloween event comes towards its 30th anniversary, one thing is known: fear is eternal. HHN is forever.